Some of our customers who use the Presstimator for estimating the cost of their web printing jobs have asked if they can also use the Presstimator to estimate the cost of jobs that they produce in the sheetfed department of their company. And the answer is yes. And not only can we handle the sheetfed portion of it, but we don't require you to change the terminology of your web printing department into terms of sheets. So we keep the terminology completely separate between what is a web and what is a sheet. So there's no conversion that's necessary before you enter a quote. I'm just going to walk you through how you would set up your sheetfed portion of the program, assuming already that you've set up the web portion. And you'll see if you just go to Shop Settings, we have a thing in here called Locations. And Locations allows you, and in this scenario we're just going to say that we have just one plant. But within that one plant, Locations allows you to determine what different press rooms you have within your single plant. And in this case we said that our plant has our regular press room. We also have a heat set press room, and we also have a sheet fed press room. And what that essentially does is it allows you to keep those costs separate, and you can choose those when you go to create a job. Now, one of the nice things about the Presstimator is how fast you can create a quote based on your shop settings and what you have set up as being your defaults. So what happens is you can set up your defaults and then indicate which press room each one of those defaults is pointing to. So when you create a job, you can just say very quickly, the job is in my cold set web, and say use my defaults, and it would use all the defaults you set up in shop settings that are specific to the cold set press. Whereas if you started a job and you said it's in my heat set press room, you can also say use all my defaults, and it would take the shop settings that are specific to your heat set press room. And same thing for your sheet fed. When you set up a job, you can just say this is going to be printed in my sheet fed, and you can still click that same use defaults button, but it's going to get the defaults from different areas. So let me just walk through and I'll show you how you can set up in the different areas of shop settings your different press rooms. So let me go to paper stocks, and you can see here there's the entry area again, and down below is the grid. And you can see on each entry in this paper list is a drop down for location. So let me highlight, I'm going to highlight my 50-pound white offset. And the way I have this set up right now is that this offset is for all my plants and all my locations. But I can click this drop down and then specifically indicate which press or which paper stock this paper points to in the press room. So in this case I'm going to say it doesn't apply to the entire plant. In this case it just applies to my cold set, my normal press that I have running in the thing in the shop. And so this 50-pound white offset is 40 cents per pound. And I mark this as being my default. Okay, but this is the default for this press room. Now let's say we also use 50-pound white offset paper, but we use it in our sheet fed department. So what I would like to do is just create another one of these entries and indicate what the cost is to me for that 50-pound white offset when the location is in my sheet fed press room. So let me just copy this entry. It's going to just duplicate that entry and allows me to modify it. In this case it's still offset, but there is no core waste, so this is in my sheet fed press. And I'm going to indicate that instead of being in my primary plant and location, that this is actually on my sheet fed press. It is still my white 50-pound white offset, but the cost for sheet is actually a little bit more costly than it is for my rolls of paper. And so in this case I'm just going to say that it's 55 cents per pound. And I'm going to also say that this is my default for my sheet fed press room. So when I click the apply button, I now have two defaults for 50-pound white offset. I have a default for 50-pound white offset in my primary press room, and I also have a default 50-pound white offset for my sheet fed press room, and they have two different costs associated with it. So when I go to create a job, if I say the job includes 50-pound white offset, When it goes to find which match, it's going to first look and see which press room is this supposed to be printed in, and then it will get the appropriate cost based on that location of that job. You'll see throughout shop settings we have this location, so you can specify which item is being used in which press room. So another example is in color ink. You can see I have this set up to be in my normal press room, and right now all the drop downs say all plants and locations. But let's say I have, in this case, I have a brilliant red that I'm currently highlighting, but this brilliant red is actually for my web press, and I'm just going to click the apply button. And what I'm also going to say is I'm going to say copy this. I have another brilliant red that I'm going to be using in my sheetfed, and it has a different cost associated with it. So in this case, I'm going to say copy, and in this case, it's still my default, but it's going to be my default now for my sheetfed, and it's going to be brilliant red, and I can put in a different cost per pound. So let's say the cost per pound for my sheetfed for brilliant red is $4 per pound, and I click the apply button, and you see now I still have two brilliant reds, and they're both as a default, but they're a default based on a different press room. And you can go through. We also have items in proofing, where you can say a press proof is based off of which press room is it based on for proofing. You can see here we have a cost here for a sheet versus the standard for the webs. And also we also have an area in press. Now press is where you're going to set up information about your sheet-fed press. In this case we have our sample presses in here that are web presses, so we have the 22 3/4 inch presses, but I can also create a sheet-fed press in here. And if I click on this, I determine that the location for this is my sheet-fed press room. I named my sheet-fed press. I gave it the average impressions per hour and cutoff, and described it, and then put in what the hourly rates are. And when I apply that, you can see that I also made this my default. So now if I start a job and I say it's a sheet-fed job, and I say use all my defaults, it's going to look to see that it's being produced in your sheet-fed press room, and this is going to be the default press that it uses. Versus if I was doing a web job and I said use all my defaults, it would know that I'm to get my default web press based off of my shop settings. We also have we have locations in bindery as well. Again, you can specify, is this bindery being done in which department, or you can say I have used one bindery department, and regardless of which press I'm going to be using, my sheet-fed or my web press, that this is the cost to bind everything regardless of which it is. So I can specify a very pinpoint and say specifically this is the room, this is the press room that I'm going to be doing it in, or if I just say my entire plant, or throughout my plant, and throughout, if you had multiple plants you could do it there as well. And same thing with finishing. You have the opportunity to specify where exactly is this finishing process, what exactly, which press room this finishing process applies to, and then when you select the job, it will pull in the correct one. So in this case, I can now show you. Now we're done setting up shop settings, and that's how simple it was just to add in our sheet-fed department. Now when you go to create a quote, then we'll just create a new quote here, and when I enter the information here, I can enter the plant, but in this case I only have that one plant. But if I had multiple plants, I can specify multiple plants and multiple locations in each plant. So let's say that your company has 2 plants, and within each plant you have a web press and you also have a sheet-fed department. You could actually have those built into 4 different cost centers, and then just by coming in and creating a quote, you can indicate which plant is it going to be produced in. And then when you go to the specs tab, the very first one, and going to enter in information about the job, you can see which plant it's going to be done in, but then you can actually specify which location is it going to be done in each one. So it gives you a lot of flexibility on where do you want to print. So in this case, let's just say we want to print 20,000 copies of a 24-page tab. And this would be a typical with 34-inch web width. And let's see that goes in my normal press room. This would be an example of entering information on a web job, on a web printing job. And right now I can say load all my defaults, and it would load all these defaults based on my primary plant and it being produced in my press room. Now in case of, let's say we wanted to do a sheet-fed job, we would say that there's 2 pages and the format would be of type sheet. You can see now it's, instead of being web width and cutoff, it is now paper length and paper width. So I can say that I have an 8.5 inch by 11, and this is actually going to be produced in my sheet-fed press room. Now when I click the load all defaults button, it's going to find all of those costs that were specific to this press room. So it's a way of still creating very fast quotes off of a single screen, but being very specific on where those costs are coming from. Another thing is you can also combine. So let's say you have a sheet-fed job and a web job, and you want to combine them into a single quote. Within the Presstimator, you can combine those into a single quote that goes back to the customer. You can enter in a quote specifically for the sheet-fed job and enter a quote for the web job, and then combine the 2 of them together into a single quote. And I can show that to you too. Let's say that I have, let's go back to my 24-page tab. That is going to be 34-inch web, and the cutoff was going to be 22 3/4 inch press, and that this was going to be completed in my normal press room, in my web press. At that point I can say load all my defaults, but in this case I actually want to include, let's say we also had to include an insert into this web job. And so I can go to bindery and I can say that I'm going to be doing some binding, and let's just call it stitch and trim, and we'll just put the finish size is 11 by 16, but we're going to be including some inserts in here. And if I just select inserts, I can create a new insert, and it's of type insert, and I'm just going to call it insert number 1. And what we say is that insert is going to be, let's say we wanted that insert to be on 50-pound paper. And you could put any information here as you want and then just say apply. So now what we're saying is that within this job you have your normal web job, but you also have an insert that needs to be inserted in here. And let's say that this insert is 8.5 by 11 on offset. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to enter in the costs for the bindery, for the inclusion of this additional insert. So I'm going to jump to the main bindery tab so I can actually put in costs for this. And if I go here, I have the information was brought over, but you can see here that there's a cost to print inserts. I can click the override button and just manually type in a number if I wanted to, or we have a calculator here which you can go off and retrieve this information. So let's open the calculator, and it knows that we have this insert that we entered. We have 20,000 of them. It's 8.5 by 11 on offset paper. Now if you're going to be doing the printing yourselves, you can actually just put in what the cost is for setup and the cost per thousand, and we'll calculate and include that cost here automatically. Or what you could do is, let's say that you set up a quote for this job and you already quoted the cost of that sheet-fed job using another quote. I can import that information from that other quote. So let's say I go here, it opens up my quote history, and you can see here I have I already did a quote for the sheet-fed, for the insert specifically, and I can quick view to see if it's exactly what I wanted. It is 20,000 copies of a sheet. It's 8.5 by 11, and here's what the total cost is based on that. And you can even mark up this job separately from the web job. So you can actually mark up your sheet-fed department based on certain criteria and your web job based on a certain criteria, and then combine the two of them together. So let's say that is the one that we want to incorporate into this web job, so I'm just going to select it. And you can see it brought back the cost here, the cost per thousand, what the additional thousands cost is, and come up with the total cost to produce that sheet-fed item that is going to be incorporated within this web item. We'll also, if you were to say that you had to do additional thousands of this, so if you were going to quote 20,000, in this case we were quoting 20,000 on the job, but let's say that they also wanted quote for 25 and 30,000, just by entering that in the multiple quantities field, we will use the cost for additional thousands to increase the cost also of the sheet-fed product as well. So that kind of shows you how, now we bring it back in here, how the cost is now within your web job. This is the tab, the 24-page tab. We now have that cost to produce the inserts is now incorporated in this job, and we use the Presstimator to actually quote that sheet-fed job as well, and then combine the two of them together. So let's say if we go back to specs, we can actually say load all my defaults, and if we load our defaults here, use our based on our information, we're going to bring this back. Everything was quoted, and if we go to the summary tab and go to the markup tab, we will see what our cost is to produce the web job, and then if you scroll down, you will see in finishing here what the cost is for the inserts to print those inserts. And in this case, we also marked it up again. So we marked up the cost of the sheet-fed job in the sheet-fed job quote itself, and then we marked it up again. You may choose not to mark it up again. In that case, you can just delete it and reflect that here. Or if you want to continue with our typical scheme, you can do that as well. So you have the flexibility of marking them up separately, marking them both up, and then combining the two of them together. But anyway, it kind of shows you how you were able to do that. And if I wanted more information, I can always go to the quote history, and I can open up that sheet-fed job. And you can see here, if I go back to specs here, and I can actually change the type of job. Doesn't matter, we can call it a brochure or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But you can see here how we have this set up as a sheet job. It's an 8.5 by 11, and it's being done in the sheet-fed press room. And you can see how we got those costs from here and what those costs are. And if you remember, that's the $327 that we brought back from here. And from this one, we actually marked up the sheet-fed job within the sheet-fed job quote itself. So hopefully that shows you just how we are able to not only handle your web printing jobs, but your sheet-fed printing jobs, and incorporate both of those into a single quote. So in this case, in our sample quote, this is the combined one. If I actually printed some of the reports off of here and said, give me, print out a summary format, or the quote for the customer, it would actually show on one page. It would show you the cost of producing the job, including both jobs, the sheet-fed and the web. So you didn't have to send them a quote for the sheet-fed job and a quote for the web job separately, or you yourself as the estimator would not have to manually combine the quote from your sheet-fed and the quote from your web printing together, in the case of perhaps rekeying something incorrectly. So this way the Presstimator does it all for you within the program and at once. So hopefully I'll show you how we keep the difference between the two of them. And you'll notice again in the very beginning how when we said that this was a sheet-fed job, you kept it in terms of sheets, and then when it was a web job, you kept it in terms of web printing. So it does distinguish between the two different types, and you don't have to convert one to the other in order to get an accurate quote.